begin by responding to questions in that order, and then we will rotate with each succeeding question. We have timekeepers sitting in the front row so that each candidate has the same amount of time to respond to each question. Thank you. Following the opening statements, each candidate will have up to 1 1/2 minutes to answer each question and 1 minute to make a closing statement. The timekeeper will hold up a card when there are 15 seconds left and a stop card when time is up. We ask that the candidate then finish their sentence and stop at that point. Questions from community members were allowed to be submitted in advance. During the forum, we will take written questions from the audience, and a volunteer will gather the questions and hand them to our question facilitator and then to me, the moderator. We ask that the questions be clear and pertinent to the issues at hand and made in the form of a question, not a statement. Questions must be directed to all candidates. Questions that are hostile or of a personal nature will not be asked. We may consolidate question candidates directly after the forum. It is Ward 12, City Council seat, and what are your qualifications? Aureen, you are first.
Hi, everybody. Is the sound okay? Okay. Hi, everybody. My name is Aureen Chowdhury. I am the Democratic Farmer Labor Party endorsed candidate. I'm also endorsed by several labor unions, including the AF.
Weeks ago, and I'm currently now at 42nd and Minnehaha. My business has been in the ward, well, my business has been in existence for close to 10 years. And during those 10 years, I have pretty much traversed the ward daily, at least twice, sometimes 4 times a day. In 2020, I spent the summer fixing tents in the homeless encampments around the city, and for the last 10 years living in the ward, I've spent a lot of time picking up litter and trash around the 46th Street and Hiawatha intersection, and now I'm including the platform for the light rail and all the green space along Minnehaha Creek. And that gives me a great, an excellent perspective at how difficult it is to be managing some of these issues and how the city is struggling in those areas. The perspective I bring to the table is very, very different than most of the candidates that typically run for political office, and that is the perspective of a small business owner and the pragmatism that comes with that. And also, I don't have any political agendas. I don't have any ideologies that I bring to the table. I just want to take the opportunity to give back to the city as much as I possibly.
Of Minneapolis South High School, go Tigers, class of '92. And my first job when I was in high school at South was working behind the front desk at the Nokomis Community Center. That job taught me a lot about serving community and engaging authentically in community. And I think brought about a spirit in me where I wanted to step up and serve more deeply. You know, 15 years ago, I switched my career, the first half of my career working in the private sector, and I've better aligned my work and my values by working in the nonprofit sector, where I've helped raise over $10 million to support community organizations in social services and the arts, making a difference across our community. You know, managing finances, again, and being a great servant to the time.
We will now move to questions. Again, candidates will have up to 1 1/2 minutes to answer each question. Our first question is, what do you think are the most important challenges faced by Minneapolis and why? What would you do to address those challenges? Luther, you are first.
Thank you very much for that question. You know, I think the biggest challenge currently facing our city is around public safety. You know, we need to develop a holistic public safety program for our community that meets the needs of our entire community. I believe that we need police, but the policing needs to change significantly to honor the values of our community. You know, as I look at where we are lacking right now, we do not have service coverage in our community via a third precinct. This is one of the biggest issues I've heard about over the course of this summer as I've talked to voters across the ward. You know, the other thing that we are seeing is that the Minneapolis Police Department is understaffed by over 200 officers, and that is also showing up in decreased response times into this community, and I am very concerned about that. Now, this does not negate the need for significant investment by the city in alternative response to police. As we are shifting to change policing, we need to make sure that we are lifting up and bringing to the forefront those great organizations that are doing alternative response, like our behavioral crisis response units, but other community-based organizations that are engaging in that work and making sure they have the funding they need. You know, I could go on and on about this, but the other big issue that is facing our city is climate change. We need to do everything at the city with a climate lens and making the significant investments needed to help our city be more climate resilient and ready for the fact that we are a changing climate.
Thank you. Nancy, you're next.
Well, one of the things that one of the biggest issues that I hear residents of the ward talk about is housing issues, whether it be talking about the homeless situation or the cost of affordable housing just for somebody who wants to purchase a home. And one of the first things that we need to do is we need to start building more purchasable property and look at the obstacles that are in the way of somebody being able to purchase a home. We don't have a shortage of places to currently live. We have a shortage of houses to purchase. And that's one of the things that drives people out of the ward. And so we can look at things like community land trusts, also cooperatively owned property, and building things like townhomes, which we currently aren't doing. We're building a lot of rental property. As far as homelessness goes, we definitely need to address that issue. We need to build more housing that addresses that, where it's low or no barrier housing. But when we build it, we also have to include wraparound services to help support the residents in those properties and make sure that they have the support that they need to be able to succeed. And that includes addressing things like the fentanyl epidemic. And that is number one. We're losing too many people to fentanyl overdoses.
Thank you. Laureen?
Let's face it, the stakes are really high in our city right now. That's why so many of you have shown up this evening to hear who your next city council member will be and their vision. As a policy aide, as a community organizer, it's really important to me that I use my experience so on day one, you have a council member that will be able to serve you on the issues that are most pressing to our ward. It's no secret that public safety is the conversation of this year. The challenges that we face as a city is coming together on a vision where we have unity. Unity move over $1.7 million to get violence interrupters, over 170 people that wanted the city to act now to figure out how we can ensure that we reduce homelessness and take care of our city.
Thank you. We're going to go to a question from the audience. This is a general question. What experience do you have developing policies, working with or as a city council member, and building effective relationships? Please be specific if you can. Ari, you are first.
So just a little bit about me. I went to the University of Minnesota to study the health field, and I quickly switched that around because I wanted to be in public service. I studied political science and sociology of criminology, deviance, and law, and I have had the honor of serving our city over the last 4 years as a policy aide. I've worked on policies like inclusionary zoning reforms to build more affordable housing in areas that need it. I've worked on moving COVID relief dollars to small businesses impacted by the pandemic and unrest. Again, that public safety, dollar funding. Other things that I've done is funding towards a Lake Street Safety Center that still needs to come up. crime prevention specialist role that's been empty since 2019. I also have really great relationships across government from my work both as an organizer that has convened large meetings with residents and constituents like yourself to come together on a policy. I have the endorsements of Board Chair Irene Fernando at Hennepin County. I have the support of our state senator in Senate District 63 and Representative Samantha Sensormura and Emma Greenman. And these aren't just sticker endorsements. These show you that the relationships are there in a time where government cannot be siloed, because when it's siloed, it's not showing up for you. When it's siloed, it's inefficient and we aren't spending your taxpayer dollars wisely, and now's the time to take action.
Thank you. Nancy.
I currently sit on the board for the East Lake Street Special Services District, and before I sat on that, I just kind of took a lot of things for granted, not realizing that the state of some of our commercial areas around the city, the cost of it falls heavily on the small business owners in those areas, and that includes things like litter pickup, street cleaning, the health of their trees, and organizations together on the same table and getting contacts for each of those people and trying to get something done. So that's the experience that I've had doing those kind of things, and I've had a variety of jobs working for the federal government, for the state of Minnesota, and had to work for a lot of different stakeholders in all of those different jobs.
Luther?
Yeah, over my 27-year career in both the private sector and in the nonprofit sector, I have had deep exposure to creating policy, most especially in the philanthropic sector, where I've been a strong advocate for philanthropic policy at a federal and state level that will inspire generosity from people that want to support community organizations. This has been a great opportunity for me over the years to engage in that and advocate. As also someone who's worked in the arts community over the years, I have been a strong advocate for funding for the arts. I was a very strong advocate for the creation of the Arts and Heritage Legacy Fund at the state of Minnesota. This is something near and dear to me given my musical background. Other areas where I help deliver and create policy is through my service on nonprofit boards. It's been a value of mine throughout my career to serve on arts and community engagement organization boards. I'm proud right now to help drive policy conversations through the Westminster Town Hall Forum, where I've sat on that board for the past 6 years, and also serving on other arts boards driving policy for the arts. I am a relationship builder. Wherever I've been in my career, I have sought to sit down and seek understanding of the people I'm working with, come to points of agreement, and create solutions and policies that will help advance all concerned.
Thank you. I'm just going to keep going with some questions from the audience because we have some good ones. This one is about housing. What is your plan to ensure that Minneapolis is a city where everyone has a safe, stable, and dignified place to call home? Nancy, you are first.
As I mentioned earlier, that's one of the issues that I hear frequently in Ward 12, and that is making sure that everybody can afford to stay living here in the city of Minneapolis. And currently that's not the case. We are building far more rental property than we are purchasable property, and new construction will always be more expensive than what currently exists. And as long as you are spending money on acquisition and construction costs, it is going to be far more expensive than what we currently have. And I don't know any developers that are going to pass the savings on to you. We need to build more purchasable property, and with that, we need to look at the obstacles that are keeping people from being able to purchase property, and that we have to look at programs that do things like buy points off on your mortgage, help you with down payments, because there are people out there that may have issues with their credit, but they pay far more in rent than they might pay in a mortgage payment, and that's keeping them from home ownership. And home ownership gives everybody an opportunity to build equity and pass that on to their next generation. That is what we need to see more of. That also helps build strong communities.
Thank you. Luther.
Thank you. You know, housing is one of the most important issues facing our community, and it's going to take a multifaceted approach to address it. You know, we need to make sure that we are providing the housing to meet the needs of everyone so that everyone has a roof over their head in this community. You know, we see the impacts of the lack of housing with the unhoused that are living across our city, but especially prevalently here on the south side. You know, I think it's very important that we invest in preserving naturally occurring affordable housing across our community, especially here in Ward 12. You know, many of those are duplexes that are owned by mom and pop landlords who are providing great housing to people that have lived there for a long time. We need to make sure that we are advocating for those mom and pop landlords so that they can still continue to provide that housing. You know, the other big thing we need to do is work on building pathways to home ownership for everyone. And I think we have to acknowledge the shameful history of our city with racial redlining and the racial deed covenants. You know, we are still a very segregated city because of those policies, and we need to continue breaking through those and building those pathways to home ownership for everyone. The other thing that we need to really do is continue to build the housing that meets the needs of our community in many ways, and invest significantly in public housing, because right now there is a 4-year wait to get into public housing in Minneapolis. That's not acceptable.
Thank you. Aureen?
Everyone deserves access to safe, affordable housing. Public housing is one of the best tools that we have for income-based housing to resolve the issues that we see around racial segregation, class stratification that we have within our city. Right now, we're living in 2 Minneapolises, right? And we have to understand that as Ward 12 residents, it's our responsibility to stand in allyship with parts of our city that are getting inequitable resources, and one of that is housing. Housing is safety. Housing is building economic wealth. Housing is what is going to make sure that people stay in the city of Minneapolis. I am a renter currently. I have been housing insecure in the past. I've gone from couch to couch. I'm 26 years old. I'm looking into what home ownership might look like right now, and there's financial stress that make that feel impossible. And something that one of my supporters told me in terms of a vision for our city is that we need to build a city where their kids who are off to college want to.
How will you address the challenges facing the businesses?
Dear to my heart, I've been working really hard the last 2 years to support Lake Street businesses. That COVID relief funding was really an example of how you need council members to work together even if they disagree. At first, we weren't able to move that $700,000 that we needed. It was divided. We weren't able to count to 7, but through relationship building and getting people to put in their input on supporting businesses across the city, we were able to pass that unanimously with 13 votes. That was something that I took lead on. Other things we can do to support small businesses is when there's construction, like that beeline construction that we're seeing right now that's impacting businesses, is giving them a heads up and making sure that other jurisdictions, your council member is responsible for making sure that it's loss of parking that they might face and how to mitigate that, or just ways to connect better to the community. So that would be my approach.
Thank you. Nancy?
Well, the reason why I took my business off of Lake Street was because of crime. My building had been broken into multiple times. I'm frequently, people would just walk in and take whatever they wanted and just look at me and say, I don't have to pay for this. I can just take whatever they wanted and just look at me and say, I don't have to pay for this. I can just take it. Small businesses can, when they're dealing with things like abandoned and vacant buildings, is it sits and it sits and it sits and it sits and it sits because it is a low priority to our current city council. And I had one of them look at me and say, well, it's a low priority, it really doesn't matter. Well, it does, because it has a huge negative impact on all the adjacent businesses. So if you're not going to address small things like that, you can't expect your businesses to succeed.
Thank you. Luther?
Yeah, East Lake Street is the lifeblood of our community and a key commercial corridor, and it needs all of our support to succeed. I think a great example of that right now is the construction of the beeline to succeed. You know, I think a great example of that right now is the construction of the Beeline corridor. Well, I think transit is a good thing. One thing that is concerning me when it comes to businesses on East Lake Street is they were not consulted or brought into that process, and they had proximity and trust. So I would advocate for getting a police presence back in the 3rd Precinct geography as soon as possible so we can have that proximity and build trust and get to know the people that are protecting and serving us.
Thank you. Maureen?
When it comes to rebuilding trust in our city, one thing that your council members need to lean on is building unity. I'm going to say it again, we're way too divided on the issue of public safety, right? There are 2 things that can be true. Our response times are not great, and we are under-resourced, and we have an issue with racist, misogynistic, and
At some point, figure out that, yes, we are going to put some trust back in our police department. Not all police are horrible. They're not all out against us. There are some very solid people, and I can't possibly think of them all as just a monolith of just horrible human beings. And that continues to happen in the press and from different groups of people, some of which, you know, are our elected officials. That's not helpful to the situation at all. It also isn't helpful that we can't even make a decision about what we're going to do regarding the 3rd Precinct and give you know, a group of employees to work. Until we can get on the same page with that, we're going to continue to have these difficulties. But we definitely need them in our ward, and the more we can see them and the more accessible they are, the more we're going to move towards a higher level of trust.
Thank you. Our next question is another one from the audience. As a children's mental health worker, I'm curious how you plan to address the mental health crisis affecting the next generation.
It's an area that I'm not at all familiar with. I don't have children, so I can't even speak for anything deeper than that. Everybody loves their children. They want the best for them, and school teachers are the same way. And yeah, this COVID has definitely taken a toll on school-age kids. It's taken a toll on a lot of people. And so that's the best solution that I can think of at this point, is getting people in the schools.
Thank you. Luther.
Yeah, I think as someone who, for the first time during COVID, turned to mental health to address my own mental health, I learned very firsthand, and I'm sure many people watching and in this room have also experienced this, how hard it is to find a mental health care professional. And I think that's the root of the problem, and especially when it comes to working with our kids. So we need to look at this from a system-wide approach and bringing in our local government and federal and state level government partners, because this is going to take significant funding to bring to bear the level of staffing we're going to need to it. And I think we're seeing the outgrowth of that in some of the crime that we've seen over the summers. The 10 to 14-year-old kids were left behind.
I had educators that really looked out for me and took care of me. I found sliding scale programs for mental health resources. I found people that were willing to destigmatize the fact that mental health and mental illness is a real thing, because that's still happening in this generation. As a city leader, the things that I can think of doing is, one, we have a youth coordinating board that works with Hennepin County and the schools that specifically works to take care of our school-age kids and give them resources and give that community. We have a phenomenal school-based clinic at Roosevelt High School that still needs funding. That's where a lot of kids get their free resources around mental health. That's how their parents get supported when they can't show up and they're working multiple jobs. There's also other health clinics like the American Indian Health Clinic and other comprehensive cultural-based clinics that support our youth, and they are underinvested in. And it's going to take someone that has connections across government, state, and county to really leverage dollars, and also someone that has a lived experience of struggling with mental illness themselves.
Thank you. I'm going to continue on this theme of youth because we received a great question from the Minnesota Youth Council. People under 35 make up 55% of the city's population. What do you see as the role of young people in decisions that impact our city and communities? Irene, you are first.
I love this question. The role of young people right now in this time is to build multi-generational connections. And I can't tell you the moments in which I looked up and I needed people who have been through the things I've been to, mentors, our wisest community members there for me, because you have lived through so much of what we've already gone through. And young people connecting with each other, with people who are parents, people who are grandparents, and really building that solidarity is going to be key. Young people right now feel the pressures of, again, getting to home ownership. Are we going to be able to have kids? Are we going to be able to live downtown? Are we going to be able to work in the place that we live? And I encourage and challenge young people to show up and be civically engaged. And I also encourage the elders in our community to reach out to those young folks and build connections. We're one big community, and our solutions come together when we're not siloed by generation, not siloed by race, not siloed by income. And that's really the task at hand for us. And I know Minneapolis is up to that challenge.
Thank you. Nancy.
We're talking about a group of people that are the next generation of parents, the next generation of care providers, the next generation of innovators. We need to support everybody in all of those different roles that they're going to be playing. We need to make sure that it's possible to still stay in Minneapolis and raise a family, provide good education for the children that you're anticipating having in the future, being able to possibly live in a large enough multi-generational house with 3 generations living under the same roof. We need to be able to make sure that we can provide jobs within a commuting distance that are well-paying, not just service industry type jobs. And we seem to be lacking in some of these areas, specifically when it comes to housing, affordable housing, and also jobs. Instead of sending people out to the 494, 694 ring for jobs, we need to be creating more jobs within the city limits, not just downtown, but at other scattered, hubs around the city. So that's kind of what when I'm thinking about that population. Those are the ways that we need to support them.
Thank you. Luther?
I'm always inspired when I get to spend time with my nieces and nephews who are all part of this younger generation. And one of the things I always take from those conversations, and I would come to this work with, is a spirit of humbleness and acknowledging that I don't know all the answers, and that sometimes some of the best ideas are coming from our youngest generations. So a willingness, if I am Ward 12, median age is 42. The rest of the city is median age is 32. So we are an older ward, which means that we need to make sure we are bridging that gap between younger residents and older residents, that we are providing access to home ownership and opportunities for engagement across our community. But again, always bringing that spirit of listening and willingness to sit down. Will we then invite community imagining of what the replacement for that space would be? In the interim, I want to make sure we're being good stewards of our public dollars. I saw a number in last week's report that suggests it will cost $30 million to build out the Century Plaza space for a 3rd precinct. That's even more than building a new building in the 3rd precinct. That's not an acceptable way to use our public dollars. In the interim, one thing that I would put forward is that we test out and pilot public safety satellite hubs across the Ward 12 geography and see how this works, because it would bring about
to the business owners on that corridor and residents in our neighborhood that this is a part of how we heal as a city in this inflection point that we're in. On day one, what I'm really interested in is having a conversation as a community, 2 separate conversations about truth and reconciliation in that corner. Let's have it not blighted. Let's move forward on that. And then where can we have a centrally located police precinct that feels completely different in 2023, right? We're talking comprehensive resources. We're talking 311 services on the ground. We're talking a place for violence interrupters to be based out of. And holy shnikes, that $30 million for that co-location is a lot. I think a wiser spend of those dollars would be creating something like a Lake Street Safety Center that I've helped move funding for. We can do that. We can have multiple spots within Ward 12, and I'm fortunate to have a really strong relationship with our inspector at the 3rd and other community members that are thinking about this right now to take this on day one, and I look forward to including your voice in our plan moving forward.
Thank you. Nancy? The City Council voted against rebuilding the 3rd Precinct building for the Minneapolis Police Department. A longer-term plan for the precinct is still not clear. Some community members say they want a police presence in the area, while others want community-led safety initiatives. How would you, as a City Council member, address your neighborhood's concerns and move this issue forward?
Well, a vast majority of people that live in Ward 12 have expressed a desire to have a police presence of some sort. How that looks, that can be quite varied. But knowing that we do need a home for the police department in the 3rd Precinct, I think, is important. When people asked me early on, do I think we should rebuild it at Minnehaha and Lake, I said no. It never made sense for me for it to ever be there in the first place, because I looked at it from a small business standpoint, and it seemed like the property was far too valuable commercially to have any sort of like city office. So it was there, doesn't need to go back there, and it probably shouldn't go back there. But we still need something in the ward that still has good response times. Now, Luther's suggestion about having substations or community centers, I think, is what he called it. I think that's an excellent idea. We've tried to, ask for something like that in the south half of the ward for quite some time, but there seems to be, I don't know if it's pushback or if it has to do with money, but it would be an excellent way to address response times for neighborhoods like Morris Park. But yes, we definitely need something in the ward, and yes, we do need to take into consideration the fiscal cost of what we decide to do in the future.
Thank you. We received several questions before the forum related to this. As a City Council member, what specific strategies do you support or propose for our unsheltered population? And how would you suggest the city address encampments? Nancy, you're first.
Well, first and foremost, because I've seen firsthand the conditions in the encampments, I'm 100% against them. We need to make sure that we have facilities available and services for each individual who's out there on the street. A number of people that are currently on the street, they know about services and they refuse them, because I've personally seen Hennepin County caseworkers, I've seen outreach workers from Metro Transit and from the Park Board, which I was surprised. I didn't realize that the Park Board had outreach workers also, have gone, spoken to people, made sure that they had information about services available, and they've still been refused. So first off, I think we need to have a review as to what might be lacking in the services that we're providing and why they're being refused, and make sure that the conditions are acceptable and have some sort of standard set up for services that are available and the housing that's available. But if you've seen the way people are currently living in some of these encampments, and where you are most likely to die of a drug overdose, be sex trafficked, be beaten, or be raped, you would say, no, this is not an acceptable way for people to live. So we need to provide more service, we need to provide more housing and wraparound services to go with it, working with the county to do that.
Thank you. Luther?
I think we have to start this conversation with talking about centering the humanity of those that are unhoused living in our communities. We need to bring a compassionate approach that works with these people to understand what they are experiencing and brings about a system-wide approach to address this issue. And what do I mean by that? We need to work with our government partners in Hennepin County, the state of Minnesota, to effectively engage with the unhoused populations. Our cat and mouse game right now is not working. We need to do better. This is not a unique problem. This is something that we are experiencing nationwide. So I would look to learning from what other cities are doing that has been effective, and really developing that housing first approach to homelessness and making sure that we are working with a shared goal to bring everyone to a more stable housing. This is going to take wraparound services to really help get people the resources they need to get on their feet again, maybe address their addiction. And, that for me is one of the biggest issues that we're experiencing here. This is a national issue. The opioid and fentanyl crisis is driving a significant portion of our homelessness. It is not the sole driver, but it is a big piece of it. So we need to get upstream and address that. And, put forward and advance ideas like a Vivo Village. We need an Vivo Village on the south side so we can give that dignified housing for those that are experiencing homelessness.
Thank you. Ari?
This is an issue that I've been working on since 2020. It's deeply personal to me. In 2020, I was helping people who were living within encampments in dire straits and using my connections as a community organizer to bring people in leadership to act. And fast forward to 2023, the city of Minneapolis, what we're doing right now is absolutely not working, but what I can tell you is I am 100% optimistic that we will be able to reduce the number of people who are unhoused. Right now, it's only about 400 plus people in the city of Minneapolis. That is manageable. The things that I have been working on right now that the city of Minneapolis can start working on tomorrow if we have the leadership for it is have a standard operating procedure on how we have a just transition of people from encampments. We're not going to call them sweeps. People are not disposable. We cannot throw them away. Village South Side, that's something that us to get to and from our jobs. We make sure that we keep each other safe, and we center the value of it doesn't matter how long you've lived in the community or how much money you make, you belong in this community. And in my Ward 12 office, you will always be included, no matter how long you've lived in the ward, whether 20 decades or 3 years, whether you're a homeowner or renter. That's how we do it in the city of Minneapolis. It's really going to be a culture shift that we do together, and also making sure that we have the economic tools to support people in our city and the protections are there.
Thank you. Nancy? If I can find it again. As a new homeowner and former renter, I'd like to know how you plan to join together the two. Many of my neighbors complain about apartment-dwelling neighbors, but I'd like to know how you plan to invite them into community.
I think some of the neighborhood associations might be even starting to address this, where you're trying to, I think, having a contact, whether it's in a management office for the different apartment buildings. Some of them are small, some are quite large, well over 150 units. But if you have a good contact for the building, relying on them to disseminate the information, I think, is probably the best way to do it, and make sure that that happens. How that happens exactly, I'm not really sure, because there's that automatic security barrier between the tenants in an apartment building and the residents outside, so you don't always, there isn't always some really good access to be able to make sure you get to know the people that live in those apartment buildings because of that barrier. Getting past that, I think you have to work with the management office to be able to do that. The other thing too is spend a lot of time walking your neighborhood and getting to know people that way. I know dozens and dozens of people that live in the apartment building up the street from me, but that's also because it's a dog-friendly building and they're always out walking their dogs. But the best thing to do is talk to people, spend time walking your neighborhood and saying hello to everyone.
Thank you. Luther?
Yeah, it's really unfortunate that there are homeowners in our community that are complaining about their renter neighbors, and so I'm sorry to the person that asked this question that you're seeing that, and unfortunately that is a reality. And I think it starts, the way we address that is by building community connectedness and building conversations and finding opportunities to find meet and greet opportunities between apartment owners and homeowners, bringing them together. Some of the apartment buildings in the ward do a great job engaging their residents socially, and maybe I would, as a city council member, suggest that they invite the community members around those apartment buildings in for those social opportunities as well, to build those connections and build trust. You know, the other part of this too is, you know, as we're looking to pathways from apartment living to homeownership, we need to continue focusing on preserving the naturally occurring affordable housing across our ward to make sure that people that would like to live in Ward 12, that may be a renter right now and want to be able to stay in Ward 12, have opportunities to do so. I'm concerned about the skyrocketing costs of buying a home in Ward 12. We see that with a lot of the teardowns and rebuilding and the prices to purchase those homes. I'd like to see ways we can preserve that housing and make sure that we're keeping those houses in the hands of individuals, not real estate speculators that are coming in here and driving those prices up unfairly.
Thank you. We also received several questions before the forum and during on this topic. What is your opinion of the proposal for the City of Minneapolis to take over sidewalk snow shoveling? Luther, you're first.
Yes, so as someone who has worked in the nonprofit sector for the past 15 years, I have a keen understanding of being a good steward of public assets. And I think if we were to institute public shoveling at the cost proposed of $40 million a year, that would be a bad use of your taxpayer dollars. Further, please hold your applause.
Hold your clapping, please.
Further, I am concerned about what we would be doing in order to implement this. First of all, how are we going to find the staffing to shovel our sidewalks? Second, are we willing to accept having legacy diesel equipment going up and down our sidewalks in the middle of the night, waking up you, your babies, and your dogs? I don't think so. The other thing that I really think about this is we have a spirit of helping each other out in this community. And I know on my block there's always a race to help out the neighbor who isn't able to shovel after the snowfall. And there's always someone who has a big snowblower who's willing to snowblow the entire block. I think we should train our enforcement on that 5% of property owners in our city who are not shoveling diligently and use our enforcement dollars there and put those other dollars to better use across our community.
Thank you. Maureen?
This is a really great opportunity for us to come together and also unify council members on a solution, right? We spend 7 months out of the year in a lot of snow, and it's no secret that sometimes we aren't even getting our roads shoveled fully in the way that we need to, and curb cuts aren't being done. So let's make sure that happens. But it is also true that we are having a conversation where people with disabilities and who are seniors are really struggling because their sidewalks are not shoveled. And while I agree that, hey, $40 million a year for all of the sidewalks in the city of Minneapolis is not the best spend, I think we can figure out ways to target approaches to help people that are most in need. I want to be a good steward of your taxpayer dollars. And it's important to me that we bring in people like Andy. I saw like 3 people pop up, but there's one Andy I'm talking about right now, who find it a great Minnesota affair to pull out his snowblower and get his neighborhood sidewalk shoveled. We need more Andys to show up as volunteers in our city. I know St. Paul has something called St. Paul Snow Angels. It's a volunteer dads of Minnesota shoveling sidewalks. We also have an opportunity for implementing pilot programs that are more targeted. And while we should double down on those problem properties, we've had over 1,900 repeat offenders, and we need to do a little bit more to ensure that our sidewalks are being plowed.
Thank you. Nancy?
Well, I contacted Longfellow Healthy Seniors a couple years ago, and I just said, hey, do you guys need some help maybe financially to maybe pay your volunteer snow shovelers instead of, trying to, scratch together a bunch of volunteers? And they said that they couldn't manage the program. It was too complex, and so then I contacted Longfellow Community Council, and I contributed $5,000 to them specifically to work with people in the ward who might have some physical difficulties, whether you've slipped and broken an ankle or whatever. But if you're having a difficult time trying to get to your own sidewalk, there would be help out there for you. The thought of spending tax dollars to shovel the whole city makes absolutely no sense to me whatsoever. We have a hard time. We are already incredibly short-staffed for things like the police department, the fire department, public works. A lot of jobs in the city are just short-staffed. Where are we going to find an army of human beings that are going to come out and within 24 hours shovel everybody's sidewalk? It's not going to happen. I'm 100% against it. There are other ways to do it, and if you want to penalize the folks that aren't shoveling their walks, that's a heck of a lot easier to do that than it is to tackle the project of shoveling a whole city.
Thank you. Okay, this is a question related to climate that we are trying to ask across all of the wards because it impacts our entire city. Minneapolis's current funding for equitable climate action in the city is about $2 to $3 million annually, coming from what's called the franchise fee. Xcel and CenterPoint utility customers in Minneapolis pay this as a percentage of our total utility bills. What scale of dedicated funding do you, as a city council member, believe is needed to meet Minneapolis's climate goals in an equitable way, and where would you propose this funding should come from? Nancy, you are first.
I think, if I remember correctly, it might have been Denver had a similar issue where they didn't have enough funds available to cover their equity their climate equity plan, and they implemented a sales tax that I think covered it. I'm not positive because I'm not real knowledgeable on that subject, but we definitely do not have enough funding to address all the issues that are in our climate equity plan. I don't know how realistic, when you look at the plan as a whole, is. Are we able to achieve the goals that are in it by, the years that are determined in the plan? We're going to have to find the money someplace, and that might have to be from a sales tax.
Thank you. Luther.
Yeah, I think the current funding for the Climate and Equity Plan at $2 to $3 million a year from the franchise fees is a pittance of what we need. We should be investing $40 to $50 million a year, which is the entire franchise fee amounts being paid to the city of Minneapolis. So I would advocate that we sequester those franchise fees and entirely dedicate them to funding the People's Climate and Equity Plan. That is a bold plan, and it needs bold investment to realize its goals for the significant investments in making our city more climate resilient, helping homeowners make their homes more energy efficient, helping landlords improve the energy efficiency of the homes so the cost to heat them is lower for renters, and making sure that this is a priority for the city. And so that really is going to show in how much we dedicate of funding. And if we aren't willing to dedicate the funding, I don't think we are taking the plan seriously. So we really need to show that we are willing to step up. And I would say, 40 to 50 is a good start, but it's going to take even more than that in the coming years. 5 to 10 years out, we should be spending $75 to $100 million.
Thank you. Oreen?
Yeah, I really appreciate this question. Climate change is the battle of our generation, and right now we are feeling the impacts as a community, whether you're the East Phillips community, which has faced outsized pollution for decades, or our natural systems in Ward 12. I'm really happy that the People's Climate and Equity Plan passed. That equity portion is really important. We need to start with those Southside Green Zone areas so Black, Brown, Indigenous people don't get left out, especially that weatherization of 30,000 homes. I think the franchise fee agreement is a key point for us to determine dedicated funding. Unfortunately, the funding that we get from the franchise fee is already dedicated to services that are within the city budget, and so removing all of that funding and putting it into a dedicated fund, unfortunately, would cause a lot of budgetary catastrophe. So we can't do that. But one idea that I have is following the lead of Chicago. Chicago is looking at leveraging their franchise agreement to get the shareholders of those billion-dollar companies that have polluted us in the past to do dedicated funding. And in the city of Minneapolis, if we have good organization between labor unions, the state government, climate organizations, then we'll be able to do it. I'm proud to be the only climate action endorsed candidate, and I'm proud to have not taken any fossil fuel money or lobbyist money for these utility companies, so I can be fully transparent and honest about what I support.
Thank you. How will you advance transparency and efficacy in local government? Irene.
Transparency and efficacy. Okay. Sorry, folks. I was like, let me turn my page and start writing. How do we increase transparency in local government? Well, one, I think an example of how we don't create transparency in local government is a good example is how we handle the third precinct conversations, right? The city of Minneapolis should be an institution that shows up first and kind of tells it all to the community. And your council member is the person that's going to be the most on the ground to you. Transparency and good governance is one of my top priorities. And how I'll make that happen is by making sure that we have town hall meetings with every neighborhood association, that I'm showing up on the ground when we're talking about an issue area and I'm hosting a meeting and knocking on your door to tell you about it, that my newsletter is accessible for you to read, and that there's availability in other languages and translated for other people to see. Also, transparency in our budget. I think we should move towards some forms of participatory budgeting, especially around public safety. We have this new Office of Community Safety that's completely restructured the way that we handle public safety, but we haven't gotten any information on how we can participate and what that looks like, and how that could improve response times and what are the barriers to get there. Those really nitty-gritty things, you need someone who has the experience within a government to really relay it to you, and so I hope to lead on this.
Thank you. Nancy.
Transparency and efficacy. Well, first and foremost, if the city is making a decision about something, as they did with the third precinct, if those site locations had to meet certain parameters, that should have been shared with the residents far before they said these are the two choices that we're going to give you. That's the kind of thing that seems to be lacking, and I don't know if that comes from public relations or what individual that should come from, but early on in that process, they need to provide far more information. Efficacy, respecting a person's time, and that means that when you call 311, you're not sitting on the phone for 15 minutes, or that when you do call, the person who is on the telephone knows what you're talking about, or they will connect you with somebody that does. And more often than not, if you call and you start asking questions, you're going to wind up with, I don't know, let me just write down your information, and you may or may not get a phone call back. I don't think customer service is a priority for our current city workers who work on 311, and that needs to be addressed. For me, as a small business owner, it's priority one. I wouldn't be able to run my business if I ran it with the level of customer service that the city currently provides the residents.
Luther?
I think you as tax-paying citizens deserve the utmost transparency from your government. And the job of a city council member is ultimately to be transparent, to learn more about these issues, and then how are we putting together policy? And, ensuring that you can be a voice in creating that policy. Again, turning our gaze to the community that we are trying to serve and saying, we want to be community informed in this work. That's the best way to bring transparency, is if we are listening to the community to bring that transparency about. I think for me, it's really just the most important thing of service is to be willing to be an open book, always share what we're working on. And I think for me as a city council member, it would be especially important to be able to tell you why I vote the way I do on issues. I'm going to acknowledge there may be times you don't all appreciate or like the way I vote, but I want to be able to explain to you why. And so that'll be a big part of my job, is to make sure that you understand the why behind the decisions we're making at City Hall.
This is a question from the audience. Ward 12 is home to a notable amount of small businesses, many who struggled during COVID. What specifically will you do as a city council member to support these small businesses? Luther, you are first.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that makes Ward 12 such a special place to live, is the commercial corridors and nodes throughout our community in Ward 12. And we did see small businesses struggle. As a resident of Ward 12, I did everything I could personally to support the businesses and engage and lift them up and make sure that they knew that we supported them and doing business with them on a regular basis. I think part of this is safety. Nancy touched on this, and I think Nancy brings a really unique perspective to this as a business owner. We need to make sure that our business owners feel safe and that their clients and customers feel safe coming into the ward. The other part of this is accessibility, and we touched on this a little bit earlier around the B-line transit. But I think this also shows up in, how are we designing our streetscape? How are we making sure that businesses still are accessible no matter how you need to access them? And so for me, that's a big priority, is looking at that. The other part is looking at the regulatory environment and making sure that, if we have a business that wants to add a patio, they can do it without having to jump through too many hoops that makes it not worth their while. That's going to add to the fabric of our community, and I think sometimes the city gets in the way of businesses trying to do new things, be innovative, and attract more customers. So I want to be a pro-business council member in helping them reach this community.
Thank you. Aureen?
Yeah, this is really, really important to me. For me, going to our local businesses is, after a really long day, that's where I get a hot meal. That's where I get the plants that I enjoy in my apartment. That's where I have meet and greets with you all so we can get to know each other. It's really, and some things that I can think of right off the bat, just like from my experience working at City Hall, is cultural corridors oftentimes get a lot of funding and support, and we're going to see that Minnehaha is going to be one of the most dynamic corridors in our city. That's the way that we're growing. I would love to work on day one to make sure that Minnehaha can be a cultural corridor and a special district that gets funding. I think some things that I have heard from small businesses that support me, like Gatu Vava Bakery, Peppers and Fries, is too often the city creates the idea and doesn't come to them first, right? Businesses want to talk to their council member. That's why that quarterly meeting is super important, to really brainstorm on how we address safety concerns. How do we create a block captain type toolkit for businesses to reach? What type of funding resources, relief funding, BTAP funding do we need to create? If they want to do activation, like doing a street festival or hosting a musical event, how do we make that easier for them to do? Those are some of the creative solutions I'm thinking about in partnership with local businesses in 12.
Thank you. Nancy?
Well, from talking to different small business owners, the first thing that we should probably do is expedite the licensing and inspection process. Too often, it winds up stalling out on somebody's desk, and it might take 2 or 3 months before somebody gets all the paperwork done that they need to be able to open their business. And they've been paying rent on that space for those months, and they're not open, they're not generating any revenue. So that's a priority. The second one is, you still have to take into consideration that small businesses need parking. They need street parking. Look at the Small Business Administration website, and you look at the radius that, for a business to survive in an urban area, when you look at the cost of labor and the cost of rent, you are pulling from a very, very large radius that includes people with cars. If you do not provide parking for those cars, your businesses will fail. The other thing we have to take care of are things like the vacant and abandoned buildings that are in this city. They have a huge negative impact on the adjacent properties. And as long as they sit there, they are going to have a negative impact on the businesses that are still in the neighborhood. If we do not address these very, very basic things, our businesses will not thrive in this city.
Thank you. Okay, we have time for one more question before closing statements. This one is also from the audience. What is your position on regulating rent, and how do you think the City Council should proceed? Nancy, you are first.
I'm 100% against rent control. It has a negative impact on both the quality and the quantity of housing in your cities. It will not benefit anybody except the people that are originally in those apartments, and they might wind up sticking around far longer than they need to because they can't afford to move someplace else. What we need to do if we want to make affordable housing is we need to build more purchasable property. We do not have a shortage of housing in this city. We don't have a shortage of places for people to live. We have a shortage of purchasable property. And some of the apartment buildings in the city and in Ward 12 are already sitting at 10 to 15% vacancy rates. That does not tell me that we need rent control. We're also sitting at 1%. That's what came out last year. And on top of it, it is a renter's market at this time where you can get things like a 14-month lease for 12 months. You can get free parking thrown in. It is a renter's market at this time. Rent control is not a good idea.
Thank you. Luther?
Yeah, I agree. I think rent control will do more harm than good to the communities that it's meant to help. And, you know, I think we have a great example of what happens when you institute rent control. We look across the river at St. Paul. Affordable housing development has nearly ceased in St. Paul. You know, I think if we want to look micro, you look at the Highland Bridge development in St. Paul. That was slated to have 3,800 units of housing developed. Only 800 are being built at this time. I would not like to see that happen in Minneapolis. A widely cited study by Pew Charitable over the recent years looked at many cities across our country, and Minneapolis was one of them. And it showed that median rent growth in Minneapolis over the period from 2017 to 2023 has been at 1%. I think rent control is not the way to address our housing crisis. I understand and I will acknowledge that the voters did ask the City Council to develop a policy. So I would start by bringing together renters, mom and pop landlords, the builders of housing, and coming up with a solution that will meet the needs of all stakeholders and make sure that we continue to provide affordable housing and deeply affordable housing to all members of our community that need it.
Thank you. Maureen?
I have been very consistent on my position on rent stabilization. I support Minneapolis. We do not need to have the St. Paul policy here. We can make reasonable limits on rent without having little to no impact on housing stock. There's over 182 municipalities that have some form of rent stabilization, and we're talking about this right now because we have a displacement problem in the city of Minneapolis. And no matter what happens in the Ward 12 seat, the math adds up that there's going to be a majority of council members that work on this policy, and you need someone that's going to show up for you and listen to your voice on the City Council.
Thank you. Candidates now have up to 1 minute to make a closing statement. Luther, you're first.
Well, thank you all, and thank you, Irene and Nancy, for this great dialogue tonight. It's been a joy. And, you know, I just want to go back to, you know, the fact that I come from this community. I'm seeking to serve this community because of a deep love of this community. I've chosen to live here, and I want to invest further by stepping up to serve. You know, my deep experience in the nonprofit sector, my deep experience in the private sector has given me the tools to be ready on day one to serve this community and work with all of you to bring about the solutions that we need, because together we all deserve a safe, equitable, and prosperous Minneapolis, and we can work together to bring that, and I look forward to partnering with all of you to bring that about. Thank you all so much for being here tonight.
Thank you. Nancy?
Thank you, everybody, for being here tonight, and thank you for being engaged in local politics. I've lived in the ward for 18 years. My business is now in the ward, and I hope it's here for a long time to come. I look at this running for office as an opportunity to give back to a community that has given so much to me. I don't bring a political agenda to the table. I don't have any particular ideologies. What drives me are the needs and the desires of every single person who lives in this ward. And I look forward to having the opportunity to represent every single person who lives in the ward. Thank you.
Maureen?
It's a big deal that for the first time in 10 years, we have the opportunity for new representation in Ward 12, and so I thank you so much for being here. I thank Nancy and Luther for running, and I just want to say, for me, what it's about is building a multi-generational, multiracial coalition so we can have safe, healthy, connected communities. I want to have a Ward 12 office that is inclusive, where no one is counted out, and that's why I have a big and broad coalition supporting me. If you look at my literature, you could see it there. I have done constituent services at the height of the COVID-19 pandemic. I have organized big meetings around complicated issues to come to policy solutions. I have a proven record of getting things done at City Hall, and that's what I'm bringing to the table. This is not enough time to talk to you, so I'm having a meet and greet on September 18th at Sister Sludge at 5:30. I want to sit with you and talk to you about how we can move our ward together. Thank you so much.
Thank you. On behalf of the Minneapolis League of Women Voters and our co-sponsors, I would like to thank the audience for coming tonight and the internet audience for viewing at home. We especially thank our candidates for being a part of the democratic process by running for office and being willing to serve our community. Many thanks to MCN6 for recording this forum and to Longfellow Recreation Center for providing space. The studio and video recording of this forum and all other City Council forums will be available unedited for viewing on the League of Women Voters Minneapolis website, lwvmpls.org. Recordings may not be edited or used by candidates or the public for political purposes. The League also researches issues important to our members and the health of our communities. If you are interested in finding out more about what we do and how you can make a difference, please visit our website, lwvmpls.org, and consider joining us as a member or volunteer. You can find more nonpartisan information about the candidates and about voting at another League website, vote411.org. Information on voting and registering to vote can also be found on the Minnesota Secretary of State website, mnvotes.gov. And remember, Election Day is Tuesday, November 7th. Early voting starts September 22nd. Please vote. Your voice matters. Thank you.